everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And today we're going to talk about glowing runes. Now this was another very popular request for the hobby cheating week, doing glowing runes on things. If you're following along in the series, you recognize these two wolfies from when we did fur. These are our two black wolves. And in looking at them, they have little red eyes. You can probably barely see, but they're there. And in looking at them, I realized they're a bit flat. Now, black wolves like this generally are kind of flat. It's just the nature of the thing. But we're going to spice it up a little. So I thought, why don't we have these things branded with some magical energy? So I got two wolves. I'm going to show you two different ways to do it. I'm going to show you one with brush and one with airbrush. Now, when we're talking about OSL, which runes and those kind of glowing objects are related to, an airbrush can be an easier way to do it, although I actually like it much better for sort of self-contained glowing runes, and I don't love it for OSL. Because I think, honestly, it's a messy version of OSL. You never get exactly what you want. It can be a nice way to do it quick, but that's for another video. We're going to talk about OSL separately. Today, we're going to specifically talk about glowing runes and that sort of thing. Scroll work, whatever. What's the difference? Intensity of light. The runes glow themselves, but don't illuminate very much around them. Okay? Think about the difference between lighting a lighter and lighting like a flashlight. Like one of those big cop flashlights, like 8D cell batteries, right? Intensity. So we're going to show you both methods. We'll start with brush, then we'll go over to the airbrush booth, and we'll do the other way. Okay. The first step is actually the same for both. And what I'm going to do here is I've got two colors. So I've got a gray, which is my heavy blue gray. Doesn't really matter. It's not very blue. It's actually quite a straight gray color. But it's my extra opaque. And that's what I want. I want something that's very solid to start with. Okay, something that's going to lay down a nice coat. And then I've got my dead white, which is my game air, so it's thinner, and you're going to see how we work these two to begin. So, for this I decided to do some wood elf runes, because I think these guys are going to end up in that kind of army as like my hounds. But it doesn't really matter. Like, just Google runes of whatever army you want. Like, I typed wood elf runes into Google and I got back like 1,000 different results for crazy different runes. It really doesn't matter. Just find some neat inspiration for your runes. That's the key to this. Okay, so one thing you are going to need for this is a fairly well-pointed brush. Doesn't have to be incredibly small, though it can be, but it does have to have a nice point to it. Okay. So we're going to start out with the gray color. Now I've watered the brush a little because I do want this to, and I'm using that and working that in because I do still want this to be controlled paint. I found a rune I like. I'm looking at it on the screen right now. You can't see it, but I'm staring at it. And I'm just going to do my best to draw something that looks like it. Doesn't really matter. So, very carefully in here, let's put it here on his haunch. How's that sound? Maybe we'll do two of them. Okay, so I'm just going to draw it in there. And literally, yeah, I'm not talking a lot when I do this because, freehand, you do have to hold your breath a little bit. Again, it doesn't really matter what the rune is. It just matters that it's there. So there we go. Oops, sorry. There we go. So now we've got a little rune there on his haunch. Let's put one on the other side too. So again, we'll water our brush just a little bit there. Get some of that paint on there. Draw it out toward the tip on the back of our thumb. And again, let's do it right up here on the top of his butt. But let's do a different one this time. Oh, how about that one? That one looks neat. We want our paint to be wet but controlled. That's the key. Don't want to let it get dry. We don't want to let it get too runny to the point where it starts going everywhere. Okay. So there you go. Nice simple rune there. So there's our runes. Okay. So I'll do those the same thing on the other one off camera because it's the other one that I'm going to use the other wolf for the airbrush tutorial. So when we pick up in the airbrush booth with him, you'll see runes on him. Now, so now we've got the gray. We've got our basic runes in there, right? The next step is, let's talk for a second here about sort of compositional elements with glowing runes and scroll things. There's a reason I picked the black wolves to do this with, as opposed to, say, the white wolf from the tutorial. And that is because things are only going to seem like they glow if against a dark surface. So, in other words, you've got to go one of two ways with this, okay? Either the surrounding surface around the rune needs to be dark. A rune on dark concrete, on black like his fur, something like that, right? Something that easily shows the color glowing out around it. Or it has to be on something white that's going to pick up the color around it. For example, parchment with a glowing rune etched into it, okay? So in other words, it has to be very dark or very light. Showing something glowing on an actual color in between doesn't really work as much because that color is going to really not reflect as much of whatever the simple light source is. So in general, these sorts of glowing runes and scrollings or whatever work best on black, gray, white. Okay? So sort of a rule, think about that as you will. If they could have a color, but then they need to be either a very dark or very light version of that color. They shouldn't be in the mid-tone. Okay? All right. So, and the central part of our glowing thing is always going to be the brightest. So if this were on, say, a book, like if I was doing a scroll in like Nagash's hand or something, a book in Nagash's hand, and I wanted to have a glowing rune on that, okay, I would do the rune itself in, let's say I wanted it to glow like red. I would do the rune itself in sort of a mid-tone red. And then in the very center, I would trace a much brighter color, like an orange or a yellow, right? That inner glow. And that's what we're aiming at here. So now I'm going to take my white, get it out here on my palette. I'm going to take a finer brush, so one that has a really, really controlled point. Because now we're going to be really careful. What we're going to do is we're going to trace the inside of this rune. Okay? So you are going to hear silence for a moment as I hold my breath and don't talk for this. I know that makes for compelling video. Okay, so you can see I just traced the white inside the rune. Okay, so now I'm going to do that on the other side. Okay, there we go. So now we've got the center of our rune being the most bright. And that's the key. We want the very middle of it to be the brightest. Okay? Now, at this point, we've still just got nothing. We've more or less got a drawing on him. And that's fun. Maybe if we want a tattoo or something, we can go down this same road. But that's honestly and obviously not what we're looking for. So now we need to actually get our glow effect happening. Okay. So what we're going to do with that to get that is we're going to take a little bit of that white that we just had. Okay. and we're going to thin it way down. Okay? So I'm going to get out my thinner medium. I'm going to get a little of that out here. And I'm going to go back up to a larger brush here. I'm going to get that brush nice and wet. Get it in the thinner. Then I'm going to grab some of that white and draw it over. Now, I want this to be fairly thin paint. Okay? You can see there. But I want it controlled. Notice how little comes off. The brush is not very wet. I wiped most of it away on a paper towel. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of trace around this thing very lightly. And it's going to have almost no effect. This is where the airbrush makes things easier. Because it's easier than glazing in this color. But we can do it with a brush. You notice I'm just tracing the whole thing at a broader angle, right? So what happened is now I've got something like that. You can see the extra effect around it, right? Where I just glazed on that thin white. Again, notice how little's coming off the brush. I don't have any pooling, nothing like that. Okay? Again, just that little bit of glaze. Now, that other side's dry. So I'm going to go back in there. Again, get most of it off. Okay, and one more time, and this time I'm going to be a little more careful and just wide out around it. Again, if I see any pooling, anything like that, I'm going to stop that immediately. Okay. But I'm just tracing over the rune in a wide pattern with this very light glaze. Okay, there we go. So now what we've got is that little bit of fuzz effect there, right? You can see that. Okay, awesome. All right, well now we've got to make it glow. So in this case, we could use any color here. Really doesn't matter. In this case, I'm going to make these glow red to match his eyes because I think some red glowing runes look pretty cool. I think red you can do, blue you can do, whatever you like. If you've got any transparent color paint, say like your Badger Ghost Tints or something like that, that gets very easy. In this case, though, we're going to go ahead and use red. What red are we going to use? Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. We are going to use a pretty cool crimson-y color that I'm a big fan of. Here you go. We're going to use this Scale 75 Bloodfest Crimson. So let's shake that all up. Now, the key with using red or like a transparent color blue, in any of these cases, red works nice for glowing runes because red itself is a naturally translucent color. Yellow, orange, all these colors are very translucent. If you're going to do this with purple or blue, those are a little more opaque. So you want to either use a very dark blue or something that's already in the transparent line. Like I said, like a ghost tint or something like that. You might be able to even get away with using the new gem paints. I don't know. I haven't tried that. But I would say stick to like your ghost tints or something like that. Okay, so I got a little of that out there. Now again, we want to thin this way down. So we're going to get some of that thinner and the water that I had, and we're going to just thin that way out. And we can test on the back of our thumb. With that white, how much does it cover over? Right? Okay, that's probably still a bit much. So let's just grab a little more thinner. Get that out, because red is naturally translucent, but we don't want it to be too thick. Okay, so now what we're going to do is over that same area, but wider, we're going to go ahead and apply this red glaze. Now, we don't want to leave any pool unequally. If you see that happen, wipe your brush and then get it up. Get it out of there. Because we don't need to win this fight all at once. Okay. So now we've got something like that. Let's get the other side. And now I'm going, you'll notice I'm going farther out than where just the white haze was. I want to carry some of this red out onto the black because that's what's selling the image of this glow, right? Is the fact that it covers over the white, and then it covers over the rune, you know, kind of the gray, and then it covers over the white haze, and then it covers over the black itself. And it looks like it's just slowly fading out in its intensity. Okay? So now what we've got is something like that. And again, we're keeping our hottest part toward the center, which is going to be our brightest color. Okay. So let's let that dry all the way. Now, when we're working in this glaze, we probably want to do, you know, when you're working in this glaze like this, you probably want a couple coats just to get it nice and even. Okay. So we'll let that dry, which it should be. Glazes dry pretty quick. It's one of the nice things about them. Now, you may notice our central area isn't quite as bright with that white anymore because I'm kind of blowing it away by tracing it over here with this color. That's okay. Don't worry. See, that's what happens when you don't let it rest long enough. You wipe a little paint off. Don't be like me. Let your glaze all dry all the way. That's what you get when you're trying to work fast on a video. That's okay. We'll work with it, not against it. There's no mistakes. Just happy little accidents. Okay, so we've still got that white on our palette, right? You can see there, our runes are looking kind of glowy. Like, that's not too bad. But what we're going to do is we're going to take some of that white. Okay? And we're going to dab it in just a bit of that red. We're going to draw them together so we get like a slightly pink color. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrace that rune again. But just the center part. I'm not even going to do the whole rune. This is where you have to have the lightest touch. Okay? Because you want it to be as though the center of the rune is just sort of alive with the glowing energy of that rune. Now, I happen to be doing this in this sort of crimson to pink. You could do it however you wanted. You could mix in a couple different colors. It's all fine. There's no wrong answer on this. Okay. So now we've got our glow etched back in there. If it's too strong, like if that stands out just a little too much, if you think that's too bright, guess what we're going to do? We're going to go back again to our red. You see how this goes? Have you picked up on a theme this week? If something's not quite working or you don't quite like it, you just go back and do it again. So we can go back to a thin red. And once again, we could just hit that ever so slightly. Right? And just fade it right back out a little bit. We could focus on the edges. And keep the center part really nice and bright. But there we go. So now our wolf here has some nice glowing runes on his butt. How fun for him. Okay, so we're going to pause right there, and we're going to pick up in the airbrush booth, and I'm going to show you maybe a quicker way to do this. The airbrush is admittedly a little bit easier way to cheat with this, although as you can see, it's perfectly achievable from a brush perspective. You can keep working it, by the way, just like I did with the brush. I could keep highlighting closer and closer to the center with white. So, you know, in the same way, I could just take it and I could go just kind of right down the center there with a very white color. And by doing that, I could kind of get just the central area to be the hottest. And that would all be fine. Again, it's more of like a season to your taste thing. How much do you want to push it? The contrast of the light against the dark is what's going to set off that glow effect on a dark surface. Okay? All right. So, we'll pick up in the airbrush booth, and we're going to go through another method to do this. All right? Back in a moment. All right, and we're back over here in the airbrush booth. Here's our other doggy. You can see we've got a couple runes etched into him. The first steps are exactly the same. The difference here, what we're going to do this time, is we're going to take the airbrush and we're going to be a little sneaky with it today. So the first step we're going to do is going to involve white. So again, we're going to drop some thinner in our airbrush as always. We're going to take our just regular dead white. I blow through this color. Let me tell you what, there's so many uses for this thing. Clearly I use a lot of dead white. Okay. So, we're going to get not much, just like a couple drops in there, and I really want to thin it down. So I'm actually going to go like 2-to-1 ratio with thinner there. Mix it up. You can see how little there is in there. Okay. I'm going to make sure I got a good flow, but it's going to be very light, very runny flow, so we're going to have to be careful with this. Anytime you go this heavy on thinner. Now, we're going to take this tip, we're going to unscrew it right off. Okay? There you go. So now we've got the needle exposed. Now again, as always, when you pull this off, 1, you're more susceptible to tip dry. 2, be careful you don't bang the thing around against anything, because if you bend this needle on the end, you're screwed. Okay, so be very careful and never put your finger on the end of it when you're doing this. So, what are we going to do? We're going to focus on this rune, and we're going to just do a slight fuzz effect around it. Okay? So, I'm going to not depress the trigger all the way, not all the way down, and I'm going to rock back real slow in sort of a circular pattern. And there we go. You can see very light touch. Just sort of a circular pattern around it. Same thing on the other side. We're just lightly pulling it back. And again, we can get in close and then pull back. And that helps bring up our intensity. So we start close. And then we rock the trigger back. And then we pull the airbrush back. And that gives us that nice fuzz effect. Okay? Alright, and that's it. Like, that's all we're doing with the white. It's pretty simple. But, again, like, I did the same thing you saw with the brush when I glazed. This was just a little bit quicker. So, let's get rid of our white here. That's all we need. Obviously, if you're doing a lot more runes, you might, use a lot more paint, but that was obviously not even close to those 2 drops of paint, so that's fine. No big deal. For this over here, I'm going to use something a little easier to mix in my airbrush. I'm going to actually go ahead and use one of these Ghost Tint, Minotaur Ghost Tints. Specifically, I'm going to use Fresh Blood, because again, I like that red, sort of pink magenta look on these guys. I think that's cool for their runes. But you could do blue or whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. Any color will work. Except black. You're not gonna get much glow out of black. I hope that should be obvious, but maybe I should state that. You can't do glowing black runes. Black doesn't glow. Not in that way, at least. Now, people who played maybe SWOTOR will correct me and say that they had glowing black lightsabers. Well, you got me on that one. But outside of that, you're not going to get it. Okay, so we're going to put a little of this fresh blood down in here. Again, it's still thinned. This is a very magenta color. It's not really very red. Okay. Again, about 1-to-1 with the thinner. Mix it up. Don't really need to take the tip off this time because we're going to be a little bigger. And so all we're going to do is we're going to start very close on him. And we're going to rock that trigger back slowly. And we're going to pull it away in a circular pattern. So you saw what I did with circle pattern and pulled back. Circle pattern and pulled back. Right? And that's really all there is to it. We rock the trigger back slowly. So we get a good flow out of there. And we just circle and pull back. And again, we're casting that glow out onto the black, right? And if you're not happy with the amount, you can go back in and hit it just a little more. It's better to go light. It's easy to put a little more paint on. It's hard to take paint off. Okay? Whoa. So there we go. Now we've got a nice little glowing rune. But, once again, the rune isn't really too well showing up there, right? Because we obscured it. So what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing as last time. So you go back in just like I did with the other one. Mix a little of your white in with a little of your original, or of your color there. And you just kind of build that rune up slowly. I'm not going to do that on camera because you just saw me do it 2 seconds ago. With the other rune, you go back to the brush. It's the same thing. The airbrush just tends to achieve the spread of your glow a little easier, right? So there you go. That's your 2 ways to do glowing runes. It really couldn't be easier. It's, you lay down a solid, opaque sort of rune. Just Google whatever type of rune you like. You go in and trace a finer line in it with a bright white color. You either glaze around a general white or you airbrush a rough white sort of fog around it. And then you lay down your top color. And you lay it down farther than the area where you had done the glaze. So that way you get a nice mix of the color over your rune, over your sort of foggy glaze, and then over the base of the color itself. Runes work best against something very contrasting to them, so bright runes over black, or dark grays. If you're going to do it over white, or so over paper or parchment or glowing runes in books, then you would just go the opposite. You would trace the rune in like a dark red, and you would then just force your highlights toward the center the same way I did with the white, and then fuzz your red around in the exact same way. Okay? And then you just bring back up like a yellow or something. So there you go. That's glowing runes. It's really pretty simple. Now my 2 little wolfies are marked with some magic runes ready to charge off into the forest. I hope you enjoyed this hobby cheating. If you like it, give it a like. If you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, we'll see you next time.